when did you take the office?
Middle of September. Okay. Yes.
Coming up on a year.
Coming up on a year.
All right, so let's start with that.
Okay.
What made you want to, put your hat in the ring for a position like this during a very difficult time for your department?
Right. So, I started as a dispatcher for the sheriff's office. So when the opening came up, I kind of thought I had retired from Springfield City, had about a year away from law enforcement, and just kind of seeing all the negative that was on the sheriff's office. And from what I had remembered from 25 years ago, the picture that was being painted wasn't the sheriff's office that I was familiar with, and wasn't the people that I knew that were still at the sheriff's office. And so I wanted the opportunity to basically to come in and help the members of the sheriff's department kind of get through troubled times, because they were really experiencing a lot of trouble as well, heartache themselves, but also to show to the community that we live in that this one incident doesn't define on who the sheriff's office is. And I hope that by becoming sheriff that I could help improve that image and really bring the community back to having the trust in the sheriff's office that really they deserve.
You touched on the emotions. That's something we don't think about. We think about the victims. We don't think about the other people that are impacted. What was that like coming on board? I mean, you've been part of the department for 25 years, but right. Coming on board and seeing some of the emotions, which I'm sure you had too.
Yeah, it doesn't seem fair to certain people to call the deputies and the members of the sheriff's department as victims when you put it into comparison with what actually happened. But they were victims of a different type. And I say that, and I know those are going to be a lot of people that get angry because I've just said that. But they faced disbelief and disappointment, and they were targeted. And people from all over the country called in here and made threats to, my poor administrative assistant, who wasn't mine at the time, but anyone that answered the phones. So they did become victims in other ways, and they were victims in that they weren't able to do their job the way they wanted to do it, because it changed their daily operations, if you will. Again, not to take away at all from the family of Sonya Massey, because they are, and Sonya was the true victims, but the deputies were being victimized in other ways.
Yeah. Was there any way that you prepared yourself as the challenges you're facing as you first took on the roles with the different reforms? Did you come in with certain ideas?
I don't want to say that I had certain ideas, with the exception of I need to talk to members of the community to understand what they're feeling and what their true perception of the sheriff's office is, because we can know what our day-to-day functions are and what we're actually doing, and know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But if the community doesn't see that, or they don't understand that, then it's for nothing. So that's one thing that I knew I had to do initially, was find out the concerns and find out where the community thought the trouble either began or still was in the sheriff's office.
So would you say that community input really was evident in the changes that you made?
Yes, for sure. I mean, one of the major things that I heard were concerns about our training, and then concerns about hiring practices. So those were two things that I really focused on coming in, trying to improve the way our background checks were done for new hires, and trying to improve the types of training that the deputies and correctional officers had the opportunity to attend.
All right, let's go with you. I'm bouncing around.
That's
here.
Okay.
She's going to hate me later. All right, so I guess looking back with, in the last year, how do you think from when you started to now with the community, is there that community trust you think that has changed?
I think we've made a step towards the direction. I think we still have a lot of work to do. I've been here 9 months, and in one hand you say 9 months and you're like, man, that's a really long time. Show me what you've done. But then in other ways, 9 months, there's certain groups that I meet with quarterly, and you're like, well, that's only 2 or 3 meetings that we've actually had with those groups, and then time to work on it, kind of thing. So it's definitely, we are not where we were before this time last year with trust in the community, but I think that we've taken a step towards the right direction in improving from where we were shortly after.
Let's talk about the training and what's
Sure.
changed since you've been on board with the deputies following the Sonya Massey show.
Right. So a lot of the impression of the community was that we really didn't have a lot of training at the sheriff's office. We didn't get a lot of training. And that is not true. We have, the state of Illinois for all law enforcement or all municipal and county law enforcement has mandates that we have to meet. And all of the deputies had met their mandates for training. For me, it was improving the type of training and really trying to give the deputies the opportunity to have more in-person trainings rather than Zoom or online trainings that meet those mandates. And I think that adding the in-person gives the ability to ask questions, to understand concepts better, and hands-on. It's more hands-on type training. We had the great opportunity, the Howard Buffett Foundation sponsored some de-escalation training for us, specifically for us, that allowed all of my deputies to go through that training, which would have been unheard of, because even though we have several agencies that offer in-person training to us, scheduling is often a problem, and they might offer the training once a year. And obviously we can't send an entire department to be gone one day. So we've had some great opportunities for some enhanced training that we didn't have the opportunity before.
And we did cover, I remember back
Yes.
in March, the de-escalation. What was the reaction from the deputies, the people in your department that took part in that?
I think most of them appreciated that opportunity and the view of seeing more of it isn't quite the same as our critical incident training or the CIT training, because the CIT training deals with basically mental health crisis. The de-escalation could be anybody in crisis. Someone that doesn't have a mental health incident going on, but is just having a bad day, but it's caused a crisis. So it gave us a little bit different perspective, and the deputies and the correctional officers that I sent really embraced the opportunity to have that training.
Well, I'm sure having the in-person, as you said, as opposed to Zoom, it's a whole different when you're in person and you're actually going through it than if you were to read it, not textbook these days, but
Sure.
online.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the hiring. That
Sure.
came under fire quite a bit
Yep.
right after. And with your former deputy's concerns about why he was hired, what changes were made?
So I think there were policies, and I think this is what is also one of those misconceptions. There was a background process that was in place. Some of the major changes to that process that we are doing now is, again, in person. We are going in person to previous employers, especially if they're law enforcement employers, to talk to chiefs or superintendents of jails, supervisors that maybe worked with someone that had, whether it's a lateral or just someone that had some experience. So we're able to really get a face-to-face interview with past employers rather than just calling someone on the phone who's giving you just the basics, just reading from the script. When we go in person, we're also oftentimes allowed to look at those personnel files to see what exactly is in there, because you know, what's important to one law enforcement person might be a little different than what we're looking for in a personality trait for our deputies here. So that's been a major improvement. Reaching out to more references, not just references that the applicant names, but developing our own references. So those are the two big things, really, the in-person reference checks and employment checks.
Are you finding any changes in people who apply? Are you getting more? Are you getting less in those applicants?
So the first couple months that I was here, we weren't getting applicants at all. We have started to see an increase in deputy applicants. We are still struggling to get applicants for our correctional facility.
I'm trying to see if there's anything else on that topic. I think we're good. All right. Let's talk about the different reforms. Any other changes in the last year, 9 months, that you have made in light of Sonya Massey, or just taking over this department and seeing that there was some time for change?
Right. So some of the things that haven't quite been implemented yet, but that we are still working on. We are working with Memorial Behavioral Health a little bit closer than we were, trying to really assess our calls on mental health calls or incidents, to evaluate if it would be beneficial for us to try and have the co-responder unit, which is similar to what Springfield City does. A big chunk of their week they have someone from Memorial that actually rides with the deputy. It always sounds like a great thing, but we have 900 square miles in Sangamon County, so having one person ride with a deputy, knowing if that's really going to be beneficial for us, is what we're evaluating. And we are doing that with Memorial Behavioral Health. It's not just us saying, oh, we don't think we need it, or oh, yes, we need it. We're looking at our calls and our volume to see if it's really worth taking one of those mental health providers that they have away from what they could be doing elsewhere. But and we're also talking to another group from Memorial about the possibility of having someone stationed in our jail to be an integral part of our jail staffing. One thing, we have mental health services that address our inmates in the jail, but again, with the new procedures under the Safety Act, where we don't have the bond and people release, they come in and out a lot faster, unless obviously they've had charges filed and they've been detained. But so sometimes they miss that mental health on the initial intake, whereas if we have someone that's embedded in our jail, we believe that even if they're just being processed in and out, it would at least give mental health the opportunity to be right there and say, hey, I know you're leaving, but here's our contact, here's our services. So we're working with them on those programs. We are also in some discussions with a kind of trying to think of the right terminology for it, a wellness group for our staff that would help with some mental health, some peer support, bringing a staff of clergy members in to help with critical incidents for deputies and correctional officers when they're involved in those incidents. So we haven't solidified that yet, but those are some programs that we are looking at bringing to the sheriff's office.
I don't think people realize how many calls that dispatch gets, or yours, that are the mental health calls.
Yeah, we have pretty significant number that of our calls deal with mental health or some kind of substance abuse that then oftentimes causes the spiral into some mental health crisis. And our population of the jail, I think we're pretty close to about 25% of our inmates have a diagnosed serious mental health diagnosis. So it is difficult sometimes for our staff who aren't necessarily trained, more than just the initial de-escalation part of it, to to provide the best services unless we have these models or these partnerships with our community members where we can bring them in when we recognize that we need that assistance.
A couple of topics with the Massey Commission
Sure.
and the legislature. First, the Department of Justice investigated.
Yes.
January they released their findings. How has that agreement been with you guys? Have you had any challenges, or is it going well?
So it's going pretty well. I do quarterly reports, so they've gotten my first quarterly report. I have a second quarterly report coming up here. They've worked with us to try and identify some training that I was struggling to try and find, and dealing with disability and investigations with different disabilities. So they're working with us to create a training to focus for our employees and my staff to focus on. Other than that, we've worked on some community engagement stuff that, things to develop a community engagement, but they've been very responsive to questions and to needs as we're working through things.
That's great. Let's talk about the Massey Commission.
Okay.
How closely have you personally or the Sheriff's Department worked with the Commission?
So we don't go to meetings together. We don't attend meetings. If they call and invite me, then I attend the meetings, and with the working groups. A lot of my involvement with the Massey Commission and the working groups has been dealing with the background checks and different resolutions. So we kind of, I don't want to say go back and forth, but we correspond back and forth with different changes or suggestions, or they may present an idea and I'll send back and say, well, this won't work because of this reason, or I can't do this. So we are still working together to try and make some headway.
And have you found positive things to come out of it with the community interaction and with their ideas?
Yeah, I think the positive thing for me is, one, being able to be involved with their discussions, hear what it is that their concern is, and being able to explain, okay, I hear you, but this is why this is done this way, or this is why I can't do this the way that you're suggesting. So having that already created forum there, instead of it just being the random or trying to respond to someone's complaint on social media, it's more organized. So it allows me to not feel like they're beating up on me personally or the sheriff's office, because they have designated groups that are bringing ideas and bringing thoughts, and it's being presented, in a non-confrontational manner, where we can have discussions and actually make progress.
Would you, I know it's supposed to wrap up in September, would you be, on board with them continuing on?
I think that I'd like to see where they are with what their goals are, or what their goals were to begin with, and what they feel like they've accomplished, and the path that they think that what they still need to work on. We haven't even, that's a good question, because no one's asked me that,
Look at that. That was Morgan.
Yeah.
So props to her.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the reforms in the legislature. Have you been following that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I know Senator Turner has a bill sitting on the governor's desk still, I believe, to be signed. I've been kind of watching for that, and I was highly supportive of that bill. A lot of those changes that she has put in her bill are ones that we had implemented into our background processes. There's a couple things that weren't in our process that I think will help. One, reducing liability on other agencies if they do tell you something negative. I think that will help have open communications to get information about what's really happened with that. So extremely supportive of that bill, and just wait for the governor to sign it.
Wrapping up, you're coming up in September on a year. Any other reforms you're working on, or any other changes within the department, now that you've been here for 9 months?
Yeah, I think it's just to say specific changes, I don't no, when you leave, I'm gonna think of something and be like,
just
oh
email it or
yeah,
call
that
me,
that was, well, that's a change, you know. But anything specific right now, I'm trying to rebuild. I'm in a rebuilding mode, and I know that, you know, as we are approaching the anniversary of the killing of Sonya Massey, everything's going to be heightened. Everyone's emotions are going to be heightened, as they should be, you know, not to take away from that. And then we'll have a trial, you know, shortly after. So right now, my goal is to maintain my staff, not lose any more staff members, continue communicating with not only the Massey Commission, but the rest of our community, to identify what they think that has been good in the last 9 months that I've been here, and what direction they think we need to continue moving to. And everything, right, at home, at work, sheriff's office, it all comes down to communication and understanding and being respectful. And I think that's, you know, where we need to continue to be. I think I started there, and that's where I want to continue. Hopefully, well, you know, we do have a couple community events coming up that everybody does. National Night Out. I know that you're always out and about with
right?
that. That's August.
Beginning of August.
Yeah, I think the National Coffee with a Cop Day is in October. Oh, look, October 1st on my little sticky note there. My little sticky October 1st. So we want to make sure that we hit some of our spots in the county with that program, and we kind of end up focusing really in on the city, right? And Springfield PD does a great job with their community relations, and we piggyback with them on occasion on stuff, but we also need to address our members in the county too and spread that out. So really try and focus on our community initiatives and build that trust. I mean, the end goal is building the trust for our community members to believe in us and to get back out in that community with them and interacting with them. I keep looking at Morgan, sorry.
Okay, you could look off.
Because she's writing and she's,
right. She
you know,
jots it
she
all
does
down.
that, yeah.
My just one last question for you. I know you can't comment on, you know, pending status and stuff, but do you have any message you want to share to Sonya Massey's family or the community as a whole as we're at a year?
I think it's easy for us to constantly say we're sorry, right? Sorry is a word. You know, that's really where we're at. Sorry is just a word. There's nothing that I can say as Paula Crouch or as Sheriff Crouch to lessen the impact of what happened to her family, her kiddos. You know, I know her son just graduated, and I felt with, you know, for him as a mom and having a son that just graduated myself. I hope that one day that they can look at the sheriff's office and believe that there were changes made that made the sheriff's department a better place, that made the deputies, and not just the Sangamon County Sheriff's deputies, all police in our area, more aware, and for them to improve their response to people that are dealing with crisis, and that one day they'll see that, you know, her life did matter to all of us, and unfortunately that what happened, something good came out of it for the community in the end.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch more videos from News Channel 20.